The unveiling. The following morning, the employees of Orion Enterprises arrived to a surprise. An all-company email had landed in their inboxes just before sunrise, calling for a mandatory meeting at noon in the main auditorium. It was rare for the CEO, Marcus Grant, to address the company directly, and rarer still for such short notice to be given. Whispers filled the hallways as speculation grew. "What do you think it's about?" one employee asked, leaning over the cubicle divider. "No idea," came the response. "But if it's coming from the CEO, it's got to be big." The mood on the 10th floor was no different. Greg Davis, unaware of what was coming, strode into the office with his usual swagger, coffee in hand and confidence unshaken. He barked at the receptionist to forward his calls and tossed his briefcase onto his desk. The email to him was nothing more than a formality, a way for the higher-ups to show they were engaged with the staff. Probably some new initiative to boost morale. Davis scoffed to one of his managers. "Let's hope it doesn't waste too much of our time." Meanwhile, Marcus Grant sat in his office, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a transformative day. He reviewed the notes he had taken over the past week, the names of those who had been mistreated, and the specific instances of toxic behavior. He felt a mixture of anger and resolve. Anger at what he had witnessed, and resolve to ensure that such behavior would never be tolerated again. At 11:45 a.m., Marcus left his office and walked toward the auditorium. For the first time in a week, he wasn't wearing the janitor's uniform. He was dressed in his signature dark suit, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he made his way through the building, employees paused to watch him pass, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. By noon, the auditorium was packed. Rows of chairs stretched across the room, filled with employees from every department. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind of energy that only comes before an unknown but pivotal moment. At the front of the room, a sleek podium stood beneath a large screen displaying the company's logo. Greg Davis sat near the front, flanked by a few of his managers. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. To him, this was just another corporate pep talk, a chance for the CEO to make broad promises that would never materialize. The murmurs quieted as Marcus Grant walked onto the stage. His presence commanded the room, and the audience fell silent. He approached the podium, his expression calm but firm, and began to speak. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice. I know you're curious about why I've called this meeting, and I promise you, by the end of it, you'll understand." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Orion Enterprises has always prided itself on being a company that values innovation, excellence, and most importantly, respect. We've built a reputation as a place where people can thrive, where every voice matters, and where integrity isn't just a buzzword, it's a principle. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, but Marcus wasn't finished. However, he continued, his tone hardening. "Over the past week, I've seen things that contradict those values. I've seen behaviors that undermine our culture, attitudes that breed toxicity, and actions that devalue the people who work tirelessly to make this company successful." The room grew tense. Employees glanced at one another, their curiosity giving way to unease. Even Davis, who had been leaning back with a smug expression, sat up slightly, his posture stiffening. "You see," Marcus said, stepping away from the podium, "for the past week, I've been walking among you, not as your CEO, but as a janitor." Gasps filled the room. Eyes widened in shock as employees tried to process what they had just heard. Marcus allowed the moment to sink in before continuing. "Yes, that was me," he said, gesturing to an image on the screen behind him. It was a photo of himself in the janitor's uniform, pushing the cleaning cart down the 10th floor hallway. "I wanted to see how this company truly operates when no one thinks the CEO is watching, and what I saw was both illuminating and deeply troubling." He turned to face the audience, his gaze sharp. I saw employees who were overworked and undervalued. I saw talented individuals afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation. And I saw leaders, people entrusted with the responsibility of guiding their teams, using their positions to intimidate, belittle, and humiliate. Just trying to make sure it's spotless, sir, Marcus said evenly. Davis smirked. Well, don't strain yourself. I'm sure you've got plenty of other tables to clean. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable, forced. Marcus noticed a few employees shifting in their seats, clearly uneasy with the exchange but unwilling to intervene. It was a dynamic he had seen before, a leader creating an atmosphere of fear and submission where people were too afraid to speak up. As the day wore on, Davis' behavior only became more blatant. He berated another employee for missing a deadline, scoffed at a receptionist who asked him a question, and loudly mocked the IT technician when he came to fix his computer. Marcus stayed in the background, watching it all. He noticed the way people avoided Davis, the way their shoulders tensed when he entered a room. It wasn't just the cleaning staff Davis treated poorly. It was anyone he deemed beneath him. By late afternoon, Marcus was in the lobby, polishing the glass doors when Davis walked by again. This time, he stopped. Still here? Davis asked, his tone incredulous. You've been cleaning all day, and the place still looks the same. Do you even know what you're doing? Marcus turned slowly, his face calm but his gaze piercing. I'm just doing my job, sir. Davis let out a mocking laugh. Well, maybe you should find a job you're better at, because from where I'm standing, you're barely keeping up. Marcus didn't respond. He simply nodded and went back to polishing the glass. But inside, he was taking mental notes, adding another tally to the growing list of offenses. By the end of the day, Marcus returned to the janitor's closet, where he hung up his uniform and grabbed his briefcase. He had seen enough. It wasn't just Davis' behavior that concerned him. It was the silence of everyone around him. The culture of fear and complacency was toxic, and it was clear that changes needed to be made. As he walked to his car, Marcus thought about the values he had built Orion Enterprises on: respect, collaboration, and integrity. It was time to remind his employees what those values meant, and to hold those who violated them accountable. Tomorrow, Marcus thought, everything changes. The deeper rot. The following morning, Marcus Grant arrived at Orion Enterprises well before dawn. Dressed once again in his faded blue janitor's uniform, he parked his car in the far corner of the lot to avoid drawing any attention. From the trunk, he retrieved his cleaning cart, carefully stocked with supplies he didn't really need, and pushed it toward the side entrance. The building was still quiet, save for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of early risers making their way inside. Marcus had spent the previous evening replaying the events of the day in his mind. Greg Davis wasn't just rude or arrogant. His behavior was systemic, a poison infecting the culture of the company. And as much as Davis was a problem, Marcus couldn't ignore the silence of the others. No one had stood up for the intern he had humiliated or the receptionist he had mocked. The real issue ran deeper than one man. It was an environment where people tolerated bad behavior for fear of rocking the boat. Today, Marcus planned to dig deeper. He didn't want just a surface-level understanding of the rot. He wanted to uncover every crack in the foundation. By 7:30 a.m., the office was coming to life. Employees poured into the building, their chatter and the aroma of coffee filling the air. Marcus positioned himself in the corner of the 10th floor, pretending to mop near a cluster of desks. From his vantage point, he could see Greg Davis's office, a glass-walled corner room that overlooked the entire floor. It was more a throne than a workspace, and Davis clearly reveled in his perch of authority. Marcus noticed that Davis arrived late, again. The man breezed in at 9:15 a.m., Starbucks cup in hand, his tie slightly askew, but his smugness firmly intact. He didn't bother greeting anyone as he walked through the floor, his phone already pressed to his ear as he barked orders at someone on the other end. "Make sure those reports are on my desk by noon," Davis snapped. And tell finance they've got until 3 p.m. to fix those numbers, or heads are going to roll. Marcus stopped mopping and leaned on the handle of his mop, watching Davis move like a storm cloud through the sea of cubicles. Employees straightened in their chairs as he passed, their movements stiff and deliberate. It wasn't respect. They were afraid of him. Mid-morning, Marcus found himself in the break room again, refilling the paper towels. A group of employees sat at one of the tables, their voices hushed as they sipped their coffee. "Did you see how he tore into Hannah yesterday?" one woman whispered. She glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid Davis might materialize out of thin air. "She's just an intern, and he made her cry in front of everyone." The man next to her nodded grimly. "It's not just Hannah. Last week, he yelled at Mike from accounting because he didn't CC him on an email. He said something like, 'If you can't handle basic communication, maybe you don't belong here.' Mike's been here for 5 years, and Davis still treats him like garbage." "It's always the same," another woman added. "He targets people who can't fight back. He's all bark and no bite with anyone higher up. But if you're below him, he'll tear you apart just to make himself feel bigger." Marcus stayed quiet, pretending to wipe the counter as the employees continued their conversation. What struck him most wasn't their anger at Davis. It was their resignation. They spoke about his behavior like it was an inevitable part of the job, something to be endured rather than challenged. A few hours later, Marcus moved to clean the area near the elevators, where a group of managers, including Davis, had gathered for an informal meeting. Marcus kept his head down, but his ears were wide open. "We've got to get those numbers up before the quarterly review," Davis was saying. "The execs don't care about excuses. They care about results." One of the other managers, a younger man with a nervous energy, hesitated before speaking. "Do you think we should, bring in more support for the team? Some of them are already staying late every night." "Support?" Davis interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. "This isn't daycare. If they can't handle the workload, maybe they're not cut out for it. Let's not waste money on people who can't deliver." The younger manager fell silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. Davis clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture as condescending as his words. "Don't worry, kid. Stick with me, and you'll learn how to separate the weak from the strong." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. It was clear that Davis's toxic mindset wasn't just confined to how he treated the cleaning staff. It extended to how he viewed his entire team. Later in the day, Marcus found himself outside Davis's office, polishing the glass walls. From his position, he could see Davis inside, leaning back in his chair with his feet on the desk. The phone was cradled between his shoulder and ear as he scrolled through something on his tablet. "Yeah, I know," Davis said, laughing at whoever was on the other end of the line. "But it's not like anyone's going to call me out on it. I've got this place running exactly how I want it." Marcus's stomach churned at the arrogance in his voice. He wondered how many other managers in the company operated under the same mentality, thinking they were untouchable because no one dared to challenge them. Just then, an employee timidly approached Davis's office, a stack of papers clutched in her hands. She tapped lightly on the doorframe. "Mr. Davis, I have the report you asked for." Davis didn't look up. "Leave it on the desk," he said curtly. The woman hesitated. "I thought you might want to go over it together." "I said leave it," Davis snapped, finally looking up. "Or is following instructions too much for you?" The woman's face fell, and she quickly placed the papers on his desk before scurrying away. Marcus felt a surge of anger as he watched the scene unfold. This wasn't just bad leadership, it was outright abuse. By the time the workday ended, Marcus had seen more than enough. Davis wasn't just a problem, he was a symptom of a deeper issue within the company. The silence of the employees, the complicity of the other managers, and the lack of accountability had allowed someone like Davis to thrive. As Marcus pushed his cart back toward the janitor's closet, he made a decision. It wasn't enough to deal with Davis alone. If he wanted to fix the culture of Orion Enterprises, he needed to send a message that would resonate throughout the entire organization. That evening, Marcus sat in his office, no longer disguised as a janitor. He wore his usual tailored suit, his CEO nameplate glinting under the light. In front of him was a stack of notes he had taken over the past week, documenting every instance of disrespect, bullying, and toxic behavior he had witnessed. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Set up a meeting with the executive team for tomorrow morning," he said, "and send an email to all employees. I'll be addressing the entire company at noon." "Yes, sir," his assistant replied. "Is everything all right?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, a determined look in his eyes. "It will be," he said. "By this time tomorrow, it will be." The invisible CEO. The early morning light filtered through the tall windows of Orion Enterprises, casting long beams onto the marble floors of the headquarters. The sprawling office building was a symbol of success, the pride of a company that boasted innovation, efficiency, and an enviable work culture, or so it appeared from the outside. Inside, however, not all was as perfect as it seemed. Marcus Grant, the elusive CEO of Orion Enterprises, quietly pushed a janitorial cart down the polished hallway on the building's 10th floor. He wasn't dressed in his usual tailored suit, but instead wore a faded blue uniform, his name stitched onto a patch on the chest. A baseball cap shadowed his face, and a cleaning rag hung from his back pocket. His movements were deliberate, but his eyes, sharp and discerning, missed nothing. This wasn't an ordinary workday for Marcus. For the past week, he had been undercover, working alongside the janitorial staff, posing as an unassuming cleaner. It wasn't a publicity stunt or a team-building exercise. Marcus had a deeper purpose. He wanted to understand the culture of his company, not the polished version presented to executives in quarterly reports, but the raw reality experienced by those at the bottom of the hierarchy. He had started to hear rumors, whispers of disrespect, bullying, and arrogance from mid-level management. Anonymous complaints had trickled into HR about an environment that didn't reflect the company values Marcus had built his career on. One name kept surfacing: Greg Davis, the office manager for the 10th floor. Known for his sharp tongue and condescending attitude, Davis was a star performer in terms of numbers, but had a reputation for treating anyone beneath him with disdain. Marcus wanted to see the truth for himself. If Davis was as toxic as people claimed, he wouldn't be able to hide it from a janitor. As Marcus pushed his cart down the hall, the building began to wake up. Employees shuffled in with coffee cups in hand, greeting one another as they prepared for the day ahead. Most barely noticed him. A few offered polite nods, but for the most part, Marcus was invisible, a part of the background, just as he had expected. At 8:45 a.m. sharp, Greg Davis stormed into the hallway, his leather loafers clacking against the floor with authority. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, his presence was as sharp as his voice, which carried down the corridor like a whip. "Move this cart out of the way." Davis barked as he approached, waving dismissively at Marcus without slowing down. "Some of us have real work to do." Marcus stepped aside, his expression calm, but his mind alert. He watched Davis barrel past him, barely sparing a glance. The office manager didn't even acknowledge him as a person, only as an obstacle in his path. "Good morning to you too," Marcus muttered under his breath, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. But he wasn't offended. He was taking mental notes. This was the behavior he had come to observe. As the morning progressed, Marcus went about his tasks, meticulously wiping windows, dusting desks, and mopping floors. His work ethic didn't waver, but his focus remained on Davis, who moved through the office like a wrecking ball, leaving a trail of discomfort in his wake. By mid-morning, Davis was back at it. He stood in the center of the open office space, barking orders to a young intern who looked on the verge of tears. "Is this what you call a finished report?" Davis snapped, holding up a piece of paper as if it were garbage. "I asked for this 2 hours ago, and you're telling me this is the best you can do. No wonder we're falling behind." The intern stammered an apology, her voice barely audible. Marcus observed from a distance, pretending to mop the floor. His grip on the mop handle tightened as he watched Davis belittle the young woman in front of everyone. This isn't leadership, Marcus thought. This is a power trip. Around noon, Marcus made his way to the break room to clean up. The small space was bustling with employees grabbing snacks and chatting. Davis strolled in, trailed by a small group of mid-level managers who hung on his every word. He was the center of attention, relishing the role. Honestly, Davis said loudly, I don't know why we need so many janitors around here. It's not like cleaning a floor is rocket science. His audience chuckled nervously, though some exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus, who was wiping down a table, didn't look up, but his ears perked. He could feel Davis' gaze on him. Hey, Davis called out, his tone dripping with condescension. Still working on that table. How long does it take to wipe a surface? Maybe we should start timing you. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Marcus, who slowly straightened up and turned to face Davis. His expression remained neutral, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. At this, Marcus's eyes landed squarely on Greg Davis, whose face had turned a deep shade of red. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of dawning realization. The room was so silent that the hum of the air conditioning was audible. Mr. Davis, Marcus said, addressing him directly, do you remember what you said to me in the break room yesterday? You questioned whether we even needed janitors. You mocked the work that keeps this building running smoothly, work that is just as valuable as any spreadsheet or sales report. Davis opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus cut him off. No, don't speak. Today is not the day for your excuses. The tension in the room was palpable. Employees who had suffered under Davis's leadership sat on the edge of their seats, their eyes darting between him and Marcus. Others who had remained silent in the face of his behavior shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been complicit. Leadership, Marcus said, returning to the podium, is not about wielding power over others. It's about inspiring, guiding, and respecting the people who look to you for direction. And what I witnessed from some of our so-called leaders was the exact opposite. He paused, scanning the room. Effective immediately, Greg Davis is no longer employed by Orion Enterprises. The room erupted into murmurs, some shocked, others relieved. Davis sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. Two HR representatives approached him from the side of the room, waiting for him to stand. After a tense moment, Davis rose, glaring at Marcus as he walked out, flanked by the HR reps. Marcus waited for the room to settle before continuing. Let this serve as a message to everyone. No matter your title, your behavior matters. How you treat others matters. And if you think for 1 second that your actions go unnoticed, think again. He stepped away from the podium once more, his voice softening. To those of you who have endured disrespect, know that change is coming. To those who have contributed to a toxic culture, consider this your wake-up call. And to everyone else, let's rebuild this company into the place we all know it can be, a place of integrity, respect, and excellence. The room erupted into applause, loud and sustained. Employees stood, their clapping a mixture of relief, gratitude, and newfound hope. Marcus watched them, a sense of purpose filling him. This wasn't just about firing one toxic manager. It was about setting a new standard. As the applause died down, Marcus delivered his final words. Thank you for your time. Now let's get back to work. And let's do better. With that, he walked off the stage, leaving behind a room full of employees who finally believed that real change was possible. Part 4. The Ripple Effect. The day after the company-wide meeting, the energy at Orion Enterprises was completely transformed. Employees walked into the office with a new sense of purpose and cautious optimism. The toxic cloud that had lingered over the 10th floor seemed to have lifted overnight, leaving behind a mixture of relief and curiosity. For some, the change was immediate and liberating. For others, it was unsettling, a stark reminder that complacency and poor behavior would no longer go unnoticed. In his office, Marcus Grant sat behind his desk, sifting through a pile of emails. Messages poured in from employees expressing gratitude, sharing stories, or asking how they could contribute to the company's new direction. One email in particular caught his attention. It was from a junior associate named Hannah. The same intern Greg Davis had humiliated in front of the entire office. "Dear Mr. Grant, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for what you did yesterday. For a long time, I felt invisible here, like my work didn't matter, and my voice didn't count. When Mr. Davis berated me last week, I thought about quitting. But after hearing your speech, I feel like things can change. I'm ready to prove my worth and contribute to Orion Enterprises. Thank you for reminding me, and everyone else, that we matter. Sincerely, Hannah Collins." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. This was why he had gone undercover. It wasn't just about identifying the problem. It was about empowering the people who had been silenced. He drafted a quick reply to Hannah, inviting her to share any ideas she had for improving the company culture. Then he turned his attention to his next steps: a cultural overhaul. By mid-morning, Marcus convened a meeting with the executive team and the department heads. The atmosphere was tense. Many of them had witnessed what had happened to Greg Davis the day before, and they wondered if they were next. Marcus greeted them with a calm but firm demeanor, his presence commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. "Let's get one thing straight," Marcus began, his tone even. "Yesterday wasn't just about removing one toxic individual. It was about addressing a systemic issue within our company culture. Greg Davis wasn't the only problem. He was a symptom. And it's our responsibility to ensure that this never happens again." He paused, scanning the room. Some of the leaders looked uncomfortable, while others nodded in agreement. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a new series of initiatives to rebuild trust and accountability at every level of this organization." Marcus outlined a comprehensive plan. Mandatory leadership training. Every manager and department head would undergo training focused on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and creating an inclusive work environment. Anonymous feedback channels. Employees would have access to a secure platform where they could report concerns, share experiences, and provide feedback without fear of retaliation. Quarterly culture audits. HR would conduct regular surveys and interviews to assess the workplace environment and identify areas for improvement. Recognition programs. Outstanding contributions from employees, regardless of their position, would be celebrated and rewarded. Accountability metrics. A new performance evaluation system would measure not just results, but also how those results were achieved, emphasizing collaboration and respect. As Marcus spoke, the room slowly began to shift. Some leaders took notes furiously, while others raised questions about implementation. By the end of the meeting, even the skeptics couldn't deny that the plan was thorough and necessary. Voices unleashed. Meanwhile, the employees of Orion Enterprises were buzzing with newfound energy. Conversations that had once been whispered in the break room were now happening openly. People began to share their stories, realizing that they were no longer alone in their experiences. At lunch, Hannah sat with a group of colleagues who had also been targeted by Greg Davis. For the first time, they spoke candidly about what they had endured. "I used to dread coming to work," said Mike, the accountant Davis had mocked over an email. "But seeing him walk out yesterday, that was satisfying." Hannah nodded. "It's like we finally have a voice. Mr. Grant wasn't just talking about change. He's actually doing something about it." Across the room, a group of senior employees watched the conversation unfold. One of them, a marketing director named Susan, leaned over to her colleague. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "It's like a weight has been lifted." The HR deep dive. That afternoon, the HR department began a comprehensive review of all past complaints that had been ignored or dismissed. Marcus had given them full authority to reopen cases and address unresolved issues, no matter how long ago they had occurred. One case involved a janitor who had quit 2 years earlier after being repeatedly disrespected by mid-level managers. Another detailed an incident where an IT technician had been denied a promotion because they didn't fit the company culture. As HR delved deeper, it became clear that Greg Davis wasn't the only one who had abused his position. "We're uncovering years of negligence," said Carla, the head of HR, in a private meeting with Marcus. "It's going to take time to fix this." Marcus nodded. "I don't care how long it takes. Just make sure it's done right." A visit from the board. Later that week, the board of directors requested a meeting with Marcus. News of his undercover operation had reached them, and while most of them supported his actions, a few were concerned about the potential backlash. "Marcus," said Evelyn Price, one of the senior board members, "we appreciate your dedication to improving the company, but going undercover as a janitor, don't you think that might have been a bit extreme?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "It was necessary," he replied. "You can't fix a problem if you don't understand it. And the only way to understand what was happening at Orion was to see it firsthand." Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Well, it's clear that your approach has made an impact. The employees are talking, and for the first time in years, they're hopeful. That's not something we can ignore." The rest of the board agreed, and the meeting ended with their full support for Marcus's initiatives. The beginning of a legacy. By the end of the week, the changes at Orion Enterprises were already evident. The air felt lighter, the conversations more open, and the work more collaborative. Marcus continued to walk the halls, not as a janitor, but as a CEO who was deeply connected to his people. One afternoon, as he passed by the break room, he overheard Hannah speaking to a group of new interns. "You'll love it here," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "This isn't just a job. It's a place where you're valued." Marcus smiled and kept walking. He knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like Orion Enterprises was heading in the right direction. And as he looked out over the bustling office floor, he knew that the real work, the work of building a culture of respect and integrity, was only just beginning. A culture rebuilt. The Monday following Marcus Grant's transformative company address began with a sense of cautious optimism. Employees at Orion Enterprises arrived to a workplace that felt different, lighter, yet full of unspoken questions about how the promised changes would play out. The removal of Greg Davis had sent shockwaves through the organization, shaking the foundation of a toxic hierarchy that many had assumed was unchangeable. But it was now up to Marcus to ensure that these changes weren't just symbolic, but transformative. The morning roundtable. By 8:00 a.m., Marcus was in a meeting with key department heads. The mood in the conference room was a mixture of tension and curiosity, with some leaders eager to see the changes take effect and others reluctant to embrace what they viewed as an uncertain new direction. Marcus could sense the unease in the air, but he wasn't deterred. "Let's start with an honest conversation," Marcus said, leaning forward in his chair. "For years, our company's values have been printed on posters and highlighted in presentations. But let's be honest, those values haven't been lived. Respect, integrity, and collaboration can't just be words. They need to define everything we do, from the top down." A few department heads nodded, but others shifted uncomfortably. Susan Bennett, the marketing director, was the first to speak up. "I think most of us agree that change is necessary," she began. "But the reality is, the behaviors we've seen, like Greg Davis, didn't happen in a vacuum. They were tolerated because there wasn't accountability. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again?" Marcus appreciated her candor. "Accountability starts with leadership," he replied. "From now on, our managers won't just be evaluated on results. They'll also be evaluated on how they achieve those results. Metrics like team satisfaction, employee retention, and adherence to our values will carry as much weight as quarterly performance." Another hand went up. It belonged to Jacob Nguyen, the head of it. What about the employees who've been afraid to speak up? How do we rebuild their trust? That's a crucial part of this process, Marcus said. We're creating a permanent anonymous feedback system where employees can report issues without fear of retaliation. But more importantly, we're empowering HR to act on those reports and holding managers accountable for addressing concerns in a timely and effective way. The room was silent for a moment as the leaders digested Marcus's words. Then Susan spoke again, her tone firmer this time. If we're serious about this, then we need to lead by example. People are watching us, and if they don't see us embodying these changes, none of this will stick. Exactly, Marcus said with a nod. This isn't just a policy shift. It's a cultural shift, and it starts with us. The employees speak. While Marcus was in his roundtable meeting, the HR department was holding its own listening sessions with employees. In a spacious conference room, Carla Moore, the head of HR, sat at the front of the room with a clipboard and an open mind. "We want to hear from you," Carla said, addressing the group of employees gathered before her. "This is your chance to tell us what's been working, what hasn't, and what you'd like to see moving forward. No concern is too small, and no voice will go unheard." At first, the employees were hesitant. Years of being ignored or dismissed had taught them to keep their thoughts to themselves. But eventually, one brave voice broke the silence. "I've worked here for 3 years," said a woman named Naomi, her voice trembling slightly. "And in that time, I've seen so many good people leave because they couldn't deal with the disrespect and lack of support. It's not just Greg Davis, it's a mindset. If you weren't in management, you didn't matter." Others nodded in agreement, and soon the floodgates opened. Employees shared stories of being overlooked for promotions, excluded from important conversations, and dismissed when they raised concerns. They spoke of the invisible barriers that had made it impossible to thrive. Carla took careful notes, her heart heavy, but her determination strong. "Thank you for sharing," she said. "I know it's not easy to relive these experiences, but your voices are critical to shaping the future of this company. We're not just here to listen. We're here to act." A shift in leadership. One of Marcus's most immediate priorities was filling the leadership gap left by Greg Davis. But instead of hiring externally, he decided to promote from within. After reviewing performance records and conducting one-on-one interviews, he identified someone who embodied the values he wanted to instill in the company. Hannah Collins, the young intern who had been publicly humiliated by Davis. The announcement came as a surprise to many, but Marcus stood by his decision. "Hannah represents what this company should stand for," he explained to his executive team. "She's hardworking, empathetic, and committed to creating a positive environment. Promoting her sends a message that we value character and potential over ego and seniority." For Hannah, the promotion was both thrilling and daunting. "Are you sure I'm ready for this?" she asked Marcus during a private meeting in his office. "You're more than ready," Marcus assured her, "and you won't be doing it alone. You'll have my full support and the resources you need to succeed. This isn't just about proving yourself. It's about showing the entire company what leadership should look like." The culture workshops. Over the next several weeks, Orion Enterprises rolled out a series of culture workshops designed to rebuild trust and foster collaboration. These sessions, led by external consultants and internal champions, brought employees from all levels together in an open, judgment-free environment. One workshop focused on empathy in the workplace. Employees participated in exercises that required them to step into one another's shoes, experiencing firsthand the challenges and frustrations their colleagues faced. Another workshop centered on effective communication, teaching employees how to provide constructive feedback and resolve conflicts without hostility. For many, the workshops were eye-opening. Susan Bennett, the marketing director, found herself sitting next to one of the janitorial staff during a session. As they worked through an exercise together, she realized how little she knew about the challenges faced by the facilities team. "I had no idea how much you all do to keep this place running," Susan said, her voice tinged with guilt. "I'm sorry if I've ever taken that for granted." "It's okay," the janitor replied with a smile. "What matters is that we're having this conversation now." The results. 6 months after Marcus's undercover operation, the changes at Orion Enterprises were undeniable. Employee satisfaction scores had risen by 40%, and turnover rates had dropped significantly. The anonymous feedback system was being used regularly, and HR had resolved dozens of issues that had previously gone unaddressed. Perhaps most importantly, the culture had shifted. Employees felt empowered to speak up, managers were more attuned to their team's needs, and the fear that had once permeated the workplace was gone. One afternoon, Marcus walked through the 10th floor, the same floor where he had spent a week as a janitor. This time, he wasn't invisible. Employees greeted him warmly, stopping to thank him for the changes he had implemented. As he reached the break room, he saw Hannah sitting with a group of interns, mentoring them with the same compassion and wisdom that had earned her the promotion. Marcus watched from a distance, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in a long time, Orion Enterprises felt like the company he had always envisioned, and as he turned to leave, he couldn't help but smile, knowing that the best was yet to come. "You said, start with part 5 more unique and lengthy." ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Part 5. The Road to Redemption. 6 months had passed since Marcus Grant's undercover operation shook the foundation of Orion Enterprises. While the initial changes had created a ripple of hope and optimism, sustaining that momentum required constant effort, especially as the dust settled and the realities of everyday work crept back in. Marcus knew that cultural change wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing journey that required diligence, consistency, and sometimes tough decisions. An unexpected challenge. Despite the progress, not everyone was on board with the new direction. A small but vocal group of managers, many of whom had thrived under the old toxic culture, resisted the changes. They resented the new accountability measures and saw the emphasis on empathy and collaboration as distractions from real work. One such manager, Richard Palmer from the finance department, had been openly critical in team meetings. "This company is turning soft," he told his team during a weekly check-in. "All this talk about feelings and teamwork, it's just a way to avoid dealing with the real problems. We're here to hit numbers, not hold hands." Richard's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Multiple employees had flagged his comments in the anonymous feedback system, and his team's satisfaction scores were among the lowest in the company. HR had already conducted 2 interventions, but Richard remained defiant. Marcus decided it was time to address the issue directly. He called Richard into his office for a one-on-one meeting. "Richard," Marcus began, his tone calm but firm, "I've been reviewing the feedback from your team, and it's clear there's a disconnect between your leadership style and the values we're trying to cultivate here." Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "With all due respect, Marcus, I think this new direction is holding us back. You can't expect people to deliver results if you're constantly coddling them." Marcus's expression didn't waver. "This isn't about coddling. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued and empowered to do their best work, and the numbers don't lie. Teams that embrace collaboration and respect are outperforming those that don't." Richard shook his head. "Maybe those numbers work in marketing or HR, but finance is different. We don't have time for hand-holding." "Finance isn't different," Marcus replied, his voice growing sharper. "Every department contributes to this company's success, and every department is subject to the same standards. If you're unwilling to adapt, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." Richard's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise. "Are you saying I should leave?" "I'm saying you need to decide whether you're willing to align with our values," Marcus said. "If you are, I'll support you in making the necessary changes. If you're not, we'll find someone else who is." The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Richard sighed. "I'll think about it." "You do that," Marcus said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. "But know this, The time for thinking is running out. Change is happening, with or without you. The employee-led initiative. While Marcus dealt with resistance from some corners of the company, a surprising source of inspiration emerged: the employees themselves. Energized by the changes, a group of mid-level employees came together to form a culture committee. Their goal was to ensure that the progress made wasn't just top-down, but also grassroots. The committee organized monthly connection days, where employees from different departments could meet, share ideas, and collaborate on projects outside their usual responsibilities. They also launched a mentorship program that paired junior employees with experienced leaders who embodied the company's values. One of the standout moments came during a connection day when an IT technician named Carla and a sales associate named Jamie collaborated on a project to streamline the company's client onboarding process. Their combined efforts not only improved efficiency, but also saved the company thousands of dollars. It's amazing what can happen when you bring people together, Jamie said during a presentation to the executive team. Sometimes the best ideas come from the least expected places. Marcus, who attended every connection day without fail, couldn't have been prouder. He knew that this employee-led initiative was a sign that the cultural shift was taking root, a moment of recognition. As the company approached its year-end review, Marcus decided it was time to celebrate the progress that had been made. He organized an all-company event in the building's spacious atrium, transforming the usually formal space into a vibrant setting filled with music, food, and laughter. The highlight of the event was the presentation of the first annual Orion Values Awards. These awards recognized employees who had gone above and beyond to embody the company's core values of respect, integrity, and collaboration. Hannah Collins, the former intern who had been promoted to a leadership position, was among the honorees. As she walked to the stage to accept her award, the room erupted into applause. Marcus watched from the sidelines, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Hannah had not only risen to the challenge of her new role, but had also become a mentor and advocate for her team. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he addressed the room with heartfelt gratitude. "The changes we've made over the past year wouldn't have been possible without all of you," he said. "This isn't just my company, it's our company. And together, we're proving that success doesn't have to come at the expense of humanity." An unexpected visitor. A week after the award ceremony, Marcus received an email that caught him off guard. It was from Greg Davis. The subject line read, "A request for a meeting." Marcus hesitated before opening it. Since Davis's termination, he hadn't heard from him and hadn't expected to. The email was short but sincere. "Mr. Grant, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I've spent the past 6 months reflecting on my actions and their consequences. Losing my job was a wake-up call, and it forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't wanted to see. I'm writing to ask if you would be willing to meet with me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to apologize and share what I've learned. Thank you for considering this. Greg Davis." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rereading the email. He wasn't sure what to think. Was this genuine remorse, or was Greg simply trying to rebuild his reputation? Either way, Marcus decided it was worth hearing him out. If Greg was truly willing to change, then perhaps his story could serve as a powerful lesson for the company. The meeting. When Greg Davis walked into Marcus's office, he was almost unrecognizable. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a humility Marcus hadn't thought possible. "Thank you for seeing me," Greg said as he sat down. "I know I don't deserve your time." Marcus studied him for a moment before responding. "Why did you want to meet?" Greg took a deep breath. "Because I need to take responsibility. When I was here, I let my ego get in the way of being a good leader, or even a decent human being. Losing my job forced me to confront that. I've been working with a coach, volunteering, and trying to rebuild relationships I damage." He paused, his voice faltering. "I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know I'm committed to being better." Marcus nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. and I hope you understand that your actions had consequences, not just for you, but for the people who worked under you." "I do," Greg said, "and I'm truly sorry." The meeting ended on a hopeful note, with Marcus offering words of encouragement, but making it clear that trust would take time to rebuild. A new chapter. As the year came to a close, Orion Enterprises was no longer the company it had been. It was stronger, more unified, and driven by a renewed sense of purpose. Marcus walked through the office one evening, watching as employees laughed, collaborated, and supported one another. The road to redemption hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as Marcus looked out over the bustling workspace, he knew that this wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. The legacy of change. The crisp morning air outside Orion Enterprises matched the energy inside the building. Nearly a year had passed since Marcus Grant, the Undercover CEO, unmasked the toxic culture that had plagued the company. Now the halls buzzed with collaboration and respect, a stark contrast to the tension and fear that had once defined the workplace. Yet Marcus knew this wasn't the end of the journey. True cultural change wasn't a finish line. It was a continual effort, a legacy to be built and preserved. A day of reflection. Marcus began the day in the same way he often did now, quietly walking the office floors. Unlike his undercover days as a janitor, he was no longer invisible. Employees greeted him warmly, many stopping to share updates about their projects or thank him for the changes he had implemented. These moments were a reminder of why he had undertaken the risky operation in the first place. As he passed by the break room, he overheard a group of employees laughing and chatting. He paused for a moment, unnoticed, and listened. "Remember when this place felt like a prison?" one employee said, shaking their head. "It's hard to believe how much has changed." "Yeah," another replied. "I actually like coming to work now." Can you imagine saying that a year ago? Marcus smiled to himself and moved on. Hearing employees express genuine happiness about their workplace was more valuable than any financial report. But he also knew that maintaining this positive momentum required vigilance. The employee town hall. At noon, the company gathered in the main auditorium for an annual town hall meeting. The room was filled with excitement as employees eagerly anticipated Marcus's keynote address. Standing at the podium, he took a moment to take in the crowd. A sea of faces, each one representing a piece of the transformation Orion Enterprises had undergone. "Good afternoon," Marcus began, his voice steady and warm. "Today, we're not just reflecting on the past year, we're celebrating the people who made this transformation possible. Each of you has played a role in rebuilding this company into a place we can all be proud of." The room erupted in applause, but Marcus held up a hand to quiet the crowd. "This transformation didn't come without challenges. We've had to face uncomfortable truths and make difficult decisions, but those decisions were necessary to create the culture we have today, one of respect, collaboration, and integrity." He paused, scanning the audience. "I want to acknowledge the courage of those who spoke up when things weren't right. Your voices were the catalyst for change. And to those of you who have embraced this new direction, thank you for your commitment. Together, we've proven that a workplace can be both productive and humane." Marcus then unveiled a new initiative, the Legacy Program, designed to ensure the values of Orion Enterprises remained intact for years to come. The program included quarterly workshops, mentorship opportunities, and a permanent employee advisory board that would work directly with the executive team. "We're not just building a company," Marcus said. "We're building a legacy. And that legacy is rooted in the belief that every person here matters." The surprise announcement. As the town hall drew to a close, Marcus made an announcement that left the room buzzing. "I want to share one more piece of news," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Starting next quarter, we're launching a profit-sharing program. Every employee, from our executives to our janitorial staff, will share in the success of this company." The room erupted into cheers and applause, with employees standing to give Marcus a standing ovation. For many, This announcement was the ultimate validation of their hard work and a testament to the company's commitment to valuing everyone equally. As Marcus stepped off the stage, he was met by Hannah Collins, now a thriving department manager. "You really know how to drop a bombshell, don't you?" she said with a grin. Marcus chuckled. "It's the least I can do. This company wouldn't be where it is without all of you." Greg Davis's redemption arc. Later that week, Marcus received an email from Greg Davis, the former manager whose removal had set the tone for the company's transformation. Since their last meeting, Greg had continued his journey of self-improvement, working with a coach and volunteering at a nonprofit organization that helped individuals transition back into the workforce. In his email, Greg wrote, "Mr. Grant, I wanted to thank you again for giving me the chance to reflect on my actions and learn from my mistakes. I've been working hard to become the kind of leader I should have been, and I'm reaching out because I'd like to share my story with your team. I think it could serve as a valuable lesson about accountability and growth. I understand if you're hesitant, but I hope you'll consider it. Best regards, Greg Davis." Marcus spent some time considering the request. He knew Greg's story could serve as a powerful example of the importance of accountability and the potential for redemption. After consulting with his executive team, Marcus decided to invite Greg to speak at one of the upcoming leadership workshops. The event was met with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, but Greg's speech won over even the harshest critics. He spoke candidly about his arrogance, the harm he had caused, and the work he had done to change. "I used to think leadership was about power," Greg said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I've learned that real leadership is about service. It's about lifting others up, not tearing them down. I hope my story can help others avoid the mistakes I made." The room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. For Marcus, this was a full circle moment, a testament to the company's commitment to growth and redemption. Looking ahead, as the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on the journey Orion Enterprises had taken. The company was stronger than ever, not just financially but culturally. Employees felt valued, leaders were more empathetic, and the workplace was a space where collaboration thrived. Marcus knew there was still work to be done. The legacy program was just beginning, and the cultural shift would require ongoing effort. But for the first time in years, he felt confident that Orion Enterprises was on the right path. On a quiet Friday evening, Marcus stood in the lobby, watching as employees left for the weekend. Some waved goodbye, others stopped to chat, and a few thanked him once again for the changes he had brought about. As the last employee exited, Marcus turned to leave, but not before pausing to look at his reflection in the glass doors. For a brief moment, he saw himself in his janitor's uniform, pushing a cart down the hallway. That version of himself had been invisible, but the lessons he learned in those days were unforgettable. Marcus smiled and stepped outside, the cool night air filling his lungs. He wasn't just running a company, he was building a legacy. And he knew that legacy would endure long after he was gone.